All right, all right. Hopefully this is working. Just checking my connections real quick just to make sure everything is good. Give me just a minute. Okay. I'm trying different things today so bear with me. I'm gonna try a live stream on Instagram as well since Restream doesn't have a connection there. So hopefully this works. Right, everything looks good on LinkedIn. Okay, well, welcome everyone to this monthly live stream that I'm trying. Just kind of experimenting, very informal. I think the topics every month that I'm going to do is just going to vary depending on the comments I get from folks and messages and just what's going on in the pharmacy, informatics, and healthcare space. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about two very important questions that I keep getting from everyone, and I'll share that in just a bit. But before I do so, I want to share. Let's see. I want to. Oops, I think I messed up some things. Oh yeah, doing too many things at once. One second. Let me get this link shared to LinkedIn. Oops. There we go. Let's try this. Hopefully that works. Nope, that doesn't work. Bear with me. I'm hoping some folks might be interested in jumping on the live stream, so I'm just sharing currently live. Feel free to join via this link. Okay. So you guys are more than welcome if anyone wants to hop on the live stream just to chat, ask questions, or add perhaps a difference in opinion. That would be great. Okay, so let's jump into it. So the very first thing I'll share is on here, which is I just shared on my link on LinkedIn, which is if you're interested in joining me on the live stream, there is the link. I'll post it in this chat as well, so you are more than welcome to join. Always more fun to chat with other people, so it's more of a dialogue versus me just rambling on to myself. So that's the first thing. If you're interested in joining, it'd be fun to exchange a few words, perhaps engage in different kinds of questions and commentary. The next piece is there's two things I really want to address today, and it's the two questions I continuously get probably multiple times a day, and it comes in two flavors. The first of which is like my experience at Verily, or more better phrased, my experience transitioning from healthcare to the tech space. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then the second piece is what are the skills and education or whatever training that I do to transition from healthcare to tech. And I will talk a little bit about that. But let's start with the very first one, which is, and for those who are on Instagram, I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm responding primarily to my live stream on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I'm going to be looking less at the Instagram, which is in front of me on my phone. But if you guys have questions on Instagram, feel free to ping me on either YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, which I'm answering questions directly there. So I'm going to start with the very first question, which is, what has been your experience transitioning to tech? And again, I probably get this every single day from multiple folks, and I want to try to address it in a broader audience. And I'm going to make a video about this in the future to talk more in depth about it, because this is just kind of unstructured, very informal. So let me share a couple of like high level thoughts on my experience transitioning. So I've been in the hospital and healthcare industry for most of my career. Started pharmacy school in 2009, and I left healthcare in 2022. That industry. So that's like what 13 or so years. So I've been in there for 13 or so years, and now I'm in tech. Uh, the experience has been very interesting. It's a bit of a culture shock, if you ask me. And the first thing I'll say is that it's a lot scrappier in tech, and maybe this is a thing that most people know. Things happen and move a lot faster in tech, and I think the way I've looked at it is like there's a huge bias for action. You iterate, you build something like a minimum viable product or an MVP, and you just keep iterating from there, which contrasts quite a bit from healthcare, where it's like you want to make sure things are correct. Whatever you're doing, you want to make sure it's correct because these are impacting the patients you take care of. So it's a little bit of a different in that aspect. You might have like things that are not perfect, but it's important to create something, some prototype or MVP, and then you continuously iterate from there. That's the first thing I've noticed. Things move a lot faster. There's probably less red tape and like committees and um, things like that in tech because again it's important to have those things when you're in healthcare and you're taking care of patients because you don't want to harm patients. So those are things, but that's one of the big differences. It's like it's a lot scrappier, it's a lot faster. Things you do moves faster, and that's the very first thing I noticed. See, Jagar has a comment here. It says, "Hi Brian, I am based in Alberta, Canada. Is okay." Oh, of course, absolutely. Welcome from Canada. Nice to have you guys. And if anyone who's in the live stream right now want to say, tell me who you are, where you're from, that would be great. Thank you guys for joining and tuning in. All right. The second thing I'll say in transitioning from healthcare to tech is that it's very challenging and very different. And I think uh, the more I'm in this area, the more I realize how much I've underestimated how difficult tech is. And I think I've grown to appreciate my prior experiences in working with software engineers or pure technical folks, the challenge that was on their plate when they were building healthcare solutions for us, because it is extremely hard. And I have a lot of appreciation for those folks now. So, what do I mean by challenging? Um, the tech part is very challenging. It's like going to a different country and having to pick up their language because they speak a different language. It's it's much more difficult even coming from informatics, which I'm familiar with some of the technical aspects, the concepts, and the language used, but it is very different going into these tech companies and really speaking the nitty gritty details of what it means to develop a technical solution. And we'll get more deeper into the weeds when I talk more about like the skills I'm actually learning, the programming languages, and some of the challenges I'm facing. But I just want to point out at a global level, it's much more challenging than I expected technically, and just learning those kind of concepts have been more difficult in general. So I underestimated it. I always thought it was a lot easier because I did have a little bit of a tech background back in high school, so I thought it was going to be easier, but it wasn't. It's pretty hard. Tony Dow, welcome, Tony. Thanks for tuning in on a Saturday. Tony's a busy guy, so I appreciate him for tuning in. So SDLC, I believe that's Software Development Lifecycle. Yes, yes. That is something that is definitely practiced a lot here. So, software development lifecycle, for those who are unfamiliar, is basically it's the lifecycle of developing a software. So, those who are in pharmacy, we might think of the medication use process. Software development also has their own lifecycle called SDLC. And the way tech companies practice this is using typically like agile processes where you do these like short sprints, perhaps like 2 week sprints, where you would focus very hard on certain buckets of work. And then you do that and you move on to the next one, you focus on the next bucket of work. But it's again to iterate fast and have working product faster. Just that's just what they do in tech. Kathy's tuning in. Hey, Kathy, thanks for joining. And I'm yeah happy to answer as much questions as I can. And I know this is very informal, and I'm just gonna stutter over words, but thank you guys for bearing with me. Hey, Phil. Phil's one of my fraternity brothers from college in PD side. Thanks for joining in, man. Okay, so I'll move on to another concept when it comes to transitioning from healthcare tech, and that is the mindset shift in terms of priorities. And it's the most interesting thing because in hospital and healthcare, especially if you are a practicing healthcare professional, our priorities are always focused on the patient. You know, it's like all the things we do, the actions we do, is all focused on making sure how we can best take care of the patient. And to that point, there's also the focus is on what the healthcare providers want because we take care of patients. So if you want to think about like hierarchy of power, if you will, in some ways, the clinicians call the shots in the hospital and healthcare industry. Makes sense, right? It's reversed in tech, where especially in health tech, where you have both engineers and clinicians. But the hierarchy is flipped in the sense that the priorities of projects and things like that, I would say probably lean more towards the engineers in that case because they are the technical talent. It is a tech focused company. So the priorities may differ a bit. So if you're coming from the healthcare world into a tech community, you might have less power, if you will, or perhaps influence in some ways. So you have to like be cognizant of that because it is a tech company after all, and the tech priorities are important too. But that was something that was very unique to me is like the mindset change. And I've heard some folks talk about it, especially our healthcare colleagues who have transitioned to tech. It's just a very different dynamic in that sense. Um, and the last thing, which is much more of a positive, a lot, very big positive for me, is the culture is very different in terms of just being very informal. In my former place of employment, the dress code was business formal. So it's like suits and ties. And I think in most of the hospitals I've worked in, it's usually some type of professional wear. You have your white coat, your tie, your dress pants, and your dress shirt, things like that, right? But in tech, it's like t-shirts and shorts. Not always, but the the dress code is definitely much more chill. And most days I am at work in meetings, and I might just be in a t-shirt. Sometimes I put on a jacket or maybe like a polo or something, but it's less common. Most people are just in t-shirts, hoodies, things like that, which is actually really cool. And it's also less formal, which is a very different than um, healthcare in the sense that formalities in terms of your title. So those of us in healthcare, we typically address people formally, Doctor So and So, Doctor XYZ, things like that. In tech, what I've noticed is that many things are on a first name basis, which was rather interesting. Um, Most of my colleagues in tech, and these aren't just MDs, there's many of them who have PhDs who are software engineers or data scientists. And many of them are also clinicians who might have an MD. Everyone goes by first name basis. It's kind of cool in a way, very relaxing. I see that there is a comment on Instagram, so I'll try to address those as well. So the comment says, "Hi Brian, I'm a first year master's student in a biostat public health data science program. I'm trying to pick up quant and programming skills relevant to health tech. What should I focus on?" Okay, perfect. So I'm actually going to transition to the next question because I kind of covered like the main big picture concepts of what I've got so far in transitioning from healthcare to tech. Hopefully that was interesting. I'm going to do a video that goes more in detail about them because this is just like me rambling. But let me transition to the next topic, which is turn this one off. This one comes all the time too. Different flavors of it. Basically, people ask me what types of things that I learned to transition, what have been the most useful, what are the best resources to use. So I'll start off by answering this with a course, a free course I put together. It's not really a course actually, but it's hosted in a course platform called Thinkific. And it's basically links to all the different resources I've used in the last few months to learn these technical skills. It's not really like a lecture based. I just maybe have a couple of commentary notes of like, this is what I use to learn R. This is what I use to learn SQL. This is a great book to read, or these are great videos to watch. So I'm going to post that in the chat here. Unfortunately, the folks on Instagram are not going to be able to see this, but let me copy this link. Let's see, skills. I'm posting it there. So that's the link. For those on Instagram, the link, you can actually go to my website, which is briankfung.com. And if you go under the courses tab, which is under services, you can find this course, which again is free. It's just all the different resources and links to things that I've used to learn these technical skills. Um, Phil says, "Is this recorded?" Yes. Yep, it's going to be recorded. It should live on any of the platforms. Looks like you're watching from Facebook. I think it should be on Facebook, but it should you'll see it on Facebook, LinkedIn, or what's the last one? YouTube. So yeah, feel free to peace out. This will be recorded. Thanks for tuning in, though. All right. So the first thing was that course. Go check those out. People ask me about how I learn or where I learn the different skills I'm learning. Go check that page out because that contains the links. Now I'll give a little bit of commentary on the different things that I've used to learn. So for the question on Instagram about quant and programming skills relevant to health tech, I think it comes in a couple of flavors. And maybe I'll say three of them, three that I found the most pressing, which is also in that course. The first of which is SQL. The reason why I say this is because in healthcare, we have a lot of data and we're trying to do something with that data, especially for your question here, you're trying to do data science. There's a lot of healthcare data if you want to do data science. You have to know SQL because SQL helps decipher what type of data is in those tables. How do you manipulate the tables? How do you join the tables? So SQL is always an absolute must and a foundation, especially for data science and especially in all the types of work that I'm doing right now. You have to know SQL. That's the very first thing. There's a book in the course that I recommend, super quick and easy. I picked up SQL, like the basic concepts, in about a month, just going through that book. Go check that out. The second thing is R and Python. And I say both of these together because it kind of depends on what setting you're in. I've noticed certain industries gravitate towards Python more, and then some gravitate towards R. So for your question here, um, I see a lot of government folks and pharma industry use more R, and then a lot of the health tech use Python. But people go back and forth in between to do data science and do whatever other things. But um, so both of those are really helpful to use. The main resources I've used for that is Coursera. And there isn't a great way to learn programming languages, I'm finding out, by reading or watching something. You have to actually do it. And it takes a lot of time, but the best way to learn these things is to literally install one of the environments where you can learn to code in uh, and just do it. You have to go through exercises and how do you do certain things. That's the best way to learn. You actually have to physically sit down and do that. um, so hopefully those are good. Trying to pick up quant. Let me see, what should we focus on? So very focused to your question, what should we focus on? SQL. I'm assuming you already know this kind of stuff, though, giving you a background, biostats and public health. So SQL is a must. Python or R, kind of depends. I was learning Python for the last few months, and I'm currently taking a course from Stanford. It's called Data Science for Medicine, and primarily using, or actually, yeah, it's primarily using R for all of our manipulations and feature engineering. R has been the main thing. So I think R is always a good place to start. Open source, very easy, and a lot of folks use R. So I'll stop there. Going back to this other question as a whole, just different experience and thoughts on learning how to code. Um, I think the last piece I wanted to talk about here is FHIR. And if you're not familiar with FHIR, FHIR is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. When I was interviewing for jobs just a couple months ago, and even talking to people now across the health tech industry, it is like it's the main common denominator amongst all these companies. Everyone is interested in folks that know FHIR. And I think if you want to get into health tech at all, FHIR is like an absolute must because you will captivate and draw attention to your application because you have experience or have some type of knowledge in FHIR. FHIR is an absolute must. Now, in terms of what I've used to learn how to do fire. Um, it's the HL7 courses. You can actually find them. You just search HL7. I also pointed out in the course, like I linked all the resources out there. HL7 has a couple of standards that they own. They are a standards development organization. They have educational training materials for things like fire. So what I did is I went to HL7. I think it was like in June and July and August, and I took two courses from them. The first of which is HL7 Fundamentals, which isn't specific to fire. They talk about all the other HL7 standards that I think anyone who's in the healthcare interoperability space should know, which is like version 2, there's CDA, and there's fire. Um, if you've worked in the hospital space, that's version 2 is like pretty much how you transmit and exchange information all over the place. Like when patients get submitted, there's an ADT system. It might exchange information with your automated dispensing cabinets in pharmacy, might exchange information with your lab information systems. But version 2 is like the main language that holds it all. And it's like 90 something percent plus of all hospitals. So it's a very useful thing to know. Um, so it's a little different. Then I took the second course, which was HL7 Fire Fundamentals. This was a pretty game-changing course for me. It's a little expensive. I think it was like between $500 to $800, depending on if you're a member or not. But this really changed how I learned, um, just period. And I'll say a couple of things why. The first of which, it really gave me hands-on experience on what it meant to exchange information with fire. It was a lot simpler than I thought. But I think talking theoretically about things is much more difficult to conceptualize unless you actually do it. So the course was amazing in the sense that it walks you through how do you exchange information using fire. And what they teach you is the four basic functions of CRUD, which is like to create, how do you create information, how do you read information? How do you update information? And how do you delete information? So they go through those four basic CRUD commands, and you really get comfortable with how Fire really works in terms of exchanging information. It gets a little bit more complex in the last like 1 or 2 weeks of the course, but that's the basic thing. It made me feel very comfortable with doing those operations on Fire, and I felt much more comfortable taking that course. The second thing related to that is if you look at the prereqs for that course, they talk about um, what you should know going into that course, which is you should have a little bit of programming experience and you should be familiar with things like JSON files and XML files and knowing how to use them. I don't remember, there's some other word about it, but basically you should be familiar with them. And personally, I wasn't really familiar with JSON much or XML. Like I was aware that those files existed, but I never used it. And I think that was a big learning curve for me because I probably spent 5 to 10 times more time in the beginning 2 weeks of that course just figuring out the basics of what the heck is a JSON file and an XML file. How do you create them? How do you use them? It was very, very frustrating. And then also more importantly, because that course teaches you how to actually you do those CRUD, perform those CRUD operations on Fire, you have to have an integrated development environment or an IDE to create those files, read those files, update them, and delete them. So it was very challenging if coming from a non-technical experience and learning how to do those things. But it was a game changer because now I'm comfortable with using multiple different IDEs. My favorite is using VS Code on the web, but I also use RStudio, Jupyter Labs, and then we have internal products and environments that I use at my current workplace. But that course has helped a lot in terms of making me feel comfortable using different IDEs and evaluating what are the different pros and cons of it. The second piece of that also that I've learned through that one course is that how do you use an IDE and integrate it with GitHub? And for those who are not familiar with GitHub, especially those of us who are healthcare providers, it's basically like version control. When you save a document, let's say you're reviewing some guideline and you are leaving comments and you need to version it in some way so you make sure folks are looking at the most recent one. GitHub is like that for code. As you create code, you have to have it reviewed and you might have to change it. GitHub is source control for code. So what was so helpful in that course is it taught me how to write code, primarily like JSON and XML files within an IDE, and then version control it through GitHub. And so there's like integration between the IDE and GitHub that was also extremely frustrating because I'm just Googling the entire time of like, how do you connect the two? How do you create an SSH or personal key to connect it to? It was very frustrating, especially again, someone who's coming from the healthcare side. But that course forced me to do it. And now I feel very comfortable integrating GitHub with any IDE that I choose to use. So I can't say enough good things about the HL7 Fire Fundamentals course because it really helped me, I think, go to another level in terms of feeling comfortable with these kind of things. Highly recommended. Um, Tony asked a question about how far is Fire coming along in, oh, the thing is like cut off. Oh, there it is. In health tech adoption. That's a good question. I haven't surveyed or seen anything recently published on how far it's come. I remember this is a little dated now. The AMIA 2019, the folks from ONC, right before finalizing the 21st Century Cures Act or interoperability rules, um, said that it's about. Oh, I shouldn't say this because that's more adoption. Actually, I'm not sure. I'll leave it at that. I'm actually not sure. I'm sure there are things that have talked about the adoption, and anecdotally speaking, it seems as though everyone I know in healthcare and healthcare tech is looking to adopt Fire. But I don't know what the numbers are on it. I would imagine because of things like the 21st Century Cures Act that everyone is definitely looking to adopt. So probably very similar to like adoption of EHRs in the US. I would think it's similar. If a group is not adopting, they will adopt, especially with things like information blocking that I think is being enforced this year, or really being enforced this year, because I think it was enforced last year. I think it will really incentivize people to adopt Fire. Let me see. Is there any other things I would say? Yeah, I'll say maybe another thing as it pertains to maybe Python and R. So, I've built up this foundation over the last few months. I finished that HL7 Fire course back in August, I think. And it was great because I worked pretty closely with a lot of the software engineers at my current company who have been very patient with me and teach me things about, okay, you've been learning in this environment outside of the company. Now let's learn within the company. And they helped walk me through how do you know, use source control with the company. There is policies and procedures that are specific to our company that we have to do that. And I'm not going to go into it, but basically they help really take what I've learned and apply it to the workplace. And now at my workplace, I'm a contributor to a lot of this kind of work, which is super fascinating. But it's due to the help of the software engineers who have been very patient with teaching me. So I think another thing maybe I'll say about transitioning from healthcare to tech is that um, be humbled because it's hard, but find people who are willing to teach you, especially software engineers, because they know this in and out and they are the people that will help you. So be patient with them, be nice to them. And I've had amazing experiences learning from them because they are really intelligent folks. So that's what I'll say there. Now, the last bit, I'll just kind of end with talking about Python and R. So I was learning Python for the last 2 months after the HL7 fundamentals because a lot of folks use Python at my current workplace. And I think if you poll most people, they would say that Python is a great language to learn. Hey, Paul. I see Paul tuning in. Thanks for joining. Uh, Python is a great programming language to learn. So I was learning that primarily through Coursera. I didn't really pick it up that easy. It just was very confusing to me. And I stopped right before doing more project oriented work with Python. So I knew enough to like navigate. And the next piece was to really like apply it to a project, which is something I highly recommend. If you are trying to learn any of these programming languages, after you learn like some of the foundations, you have to do some project. That's like the best way to learn. Build something, put it on GitHub, and have it working. That's the best way. So I stopped there because in September, I began taking the course at Stanford, which was data science for medicine, and they primarily use R. So most of my time now is spent learning R. And when I say time, I'm currently spending a lot more than I'd like. The course average is like 10 to 20 hours a week. I'm probably spending 15 to 25 hours a week, which is more than I'd like, but that's how you learn. Um, so about R and that course, I think my experience with it so far is that it's very fast paced. If you're interested in taking the course, I'll actually link it here. I think it's an amazing course to take. I don't think you should take this as your first course like me. There's a couple intro courses you can take prior to this. I'll post this on there if you are interested in taking it. But highly recommend this course because the professor is amazing, Nigam Shah. Um, I've heard so much about him over the years, and he's a great professor. So I just would recommend having a little bit more background in programming skills before going into this. So, and says the question on Instagram says, "Thank you so much. Everything you've suggested was super helpful." Yeah, I'm glad you found it useful since I'm just rambling. But yeah, so talk a little bit more about this data science for medicine course. Starting in September, and I think one of the things that I've found the most helpful, like what exactly is data science, or what do you exactly do? What are the skills that are important? I think the thing I've learned so far, and I'm working through a homework set right now on how to do this, is they're teaching us how to do feature engineering. And it's like basic, if you're not familiar with what that means, it's how do you create things that predict some outcome. So, for example, let's say we want to predict whether or not a patient will have will go into septic shock in the next 12 to 15 hours. There are certain things that probably predict it. We don't know what those things are. Those of us who are in healthcare probably have an idea. And what the course does is it teaches you to use R to pull data from EHRs primarily, like labs, meds, patient records, diagnoses, admissions, things like that. And you organize that information using R into what they call like a patient feature matrix. And it's you just think of it as like every row is a patient and every column is a feature that you're interested in. So for those of us who are in healthcare, we're probably like, oh, septic shock, probably the types of organism that grows in their cultures. So that could be a feature, or it could be multiple feature. Feature is like, is Pseudomonas um, associated with septic shock? Could that be a predictor? You might put those in there. The space bugs, things like that. Maybe it's like certain ICD codes, ICD-9 codes. Like maybe it's like patients who came in with certain risk factors or comorbidities. You might want to look at those ICD codes. So those might be features. So the course teaches you to do these steps, basically taking EHR data and converting it to this big matrix, and then further subsequently using R to visualize it and seeing where the associations may be so you can investigate further. It's super fascinating. It's I talked to a couple of friends yesterday about it yesterday. I think I was more ranting, if anything. I've grossly underestimated how difficult this is. The course itself is fast paced, but my technical skills, despite kind of like learning some of it over the last few months, it's still extremely difficult. So that's all I'll say. But it's a great course. I think it's a very useful course and skill set that you may want to learn if you want to transition to tech. And this would be more of the data scientist route if you're interested, which I think down the road, software engineering or data scientists may be more in my realm of things that I may pursue. But we'll see how that goes because this was actually more challenging than I thought. Anyways, I think I'll end it there. I only meant to talk for 30 minutes, and it's a little bit over right now. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for sending messages. I'm sorry if I don't respond. It's just been really busy with homework, which I'm going to get back to. But thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to continue to message them. I'll try to do these monthly live streams, and I'll pick out different questions that I see or themes I see to address them for the broader audience. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you next time. Bye to the folks on Instagram and there now, and bye to everyone on the rest of the